Um, I believe I approach working in the studio somewhat similar to how scientists, not directly the same, but more a matter of investigation and experiments, where I have an idea and I'll follow up on it and see how that reflects. So I never have a complete idea in my mind when I begin. I have more the sense of something to develop or something to explore. And I think scientists work in a similar way, where they have ideas of how something might work, or they know that they don't know how something works, and then they explore it. So if something interests me, I go into the studio and I start working on it. So you could say, like, if there's an experiment and then the result has to be evaluated, for me it's visual or a feeling. I really like watching footage, so if I shoot something, I really like to see it. And often I'm disappointed it wasn't the way I thought it would be, or the ideas I had weren't quite what I had hoped they would be. But then you see the imagery and that leads you to another idea, and you start building on that. So you might even begin with a simple idea. When I began physics, I had the hope that it would be very energetic and creative. And the reality was that it was extremely grueling, hard work in the laboratory with not a lot of excitement. And it takes physicists years to have results for their ideas. Working in a studio as an artist is something more spontaneous and quicker, and the results are quicker. And it scared me, the notion of becoming a graduate student in physics and spending 5 years on one problem. Well, when I began, I did everything myself. I went to an experimental film program where the whole notion was like an auteur theory, where you do everything, the sounds, the camera, everything you could possibly do. But over time, then that's allowed me to like hand it off to people that I think work in a similar way. And sometimes just working with young people that want to learn, because if you have some interest and inspiration from somebody who's willing to give their time, then it can be valuable. I think all of my work is centered on a combination of pure visual input and then time, how things change in time, or how time is perceived on film. I was interested in the Renaissance piece mostly because of the dramatic change that happened at the beginning of the Renaissance on how people were drawing, and trying to understand why that would happen. Because there's a connection between drawing and filmmaking, and then you have a flat surface and you try to show a three-dimensional space. If you want, you don't have to, but that was a big challenge for drawing. And then when the camera came along, that was one of the chief requirements, is that it actually shows depth. So I just saw that connection and was curious about that. Well, when you're either a photographer or a filmmaker and you're using these technical devices, somehow like that becomes part of the medium, and it affects the work. And so to become good at the process, I think you have to start to master those things. Just as a painter, if they want to be very good technically painting, they have to learn how to mix paint or learn some aspects of it. So I have just naturally drifted towards getting closer and closer to the camera and trying to not make it be like a sealed box, like electronics that you can't get at. I prefer more that you can take it apart and make it work your own way, or in a way that is more the way an artist would use a tool. Well, in a way, that's a simplification of the device. Like, you can look at film and say every film is a stop-motion film. It's just that it's happening fast enough with the camera that it's creating this simple illusion where you don't really have to realize that. So I think the work I'm doing is to get to the more the core essence and the simpler mechanics of it to sort of break it apart. So if every film is really just a bunch of still images one after another, the way I'm doing it is just to make it even more simple and hands-on that way. And of course people have been doing animation since the very beginning of filmmaking. I think the most naive way to use the technology is as if it's capturing reality just as it is. And if you look at an image of any movie or television, it's not reality. And there's no reason that you should be trying to fool the audience to make it seem somehow like it's and more authentic. Because it's not what the camera's best at. And it's not the most interesting thing, I think, to do with art medium. I like to begin with the set. I like because the bigger portion of the frame is filled with the set. So I'm thinking about, okay, what is in front of the camera? And I'm usually thinking of an environment before I'm thinking of an actor or a person. And then I kind of feel like I treat the actors a bit like the furniture. Like if I say, first I have this stage, and I have this idea that I want this stage, and then I have to find a couch. And then I'm like, oh, but I also need to find a dancer. You know, so that's kind of like props. Because I'm thinking of it more like the way I see it, rather than like some kind of story or some kind of emotional dynamics or anything like that. I'm a very visual person, even on just that it's a plane in front of me. And if I first choose the couch, that'll probably have a big influence on who's finally in the piece, you know, rather than probably a narrative filmmaker would look at it all the other way. Like first, what do the people say, and then what do the people look like, and then where are they? I just don't think that the biggest part of a picture is first the person. I've begun a series of 7 works that somehow will all relate to an art medium and how it relates to film. And this has something to do with an early 1920s idea that film is the 7th art. There were 6 classical arts, and then finally there was a new art form, film. And it was some kind of meta form that incorporated all the other art forms all into one. And I don't know if there is any real scientific basis to this, but it's kind of an interesting idea and an interesting way to approach what is film and how it's different than all the other art mediums. So I think I'm trying to get closer and closer to what is the medium I'm working with, and one of the ways to do that is how it relates to other mediums. So the first one I did was about drawing, sort of Renaissance drawing, and working with a flat plane. And then the second one I think had to do with some kind of relationship between television and records as audio. There's I think film was influenced a lot by this kind of pop notion that came out of when the television came and everybody was watching imagery all at once rather than the movie theater in a different setting. I think that changed the way people related to visual imagery. That you could have it in your house rather than going to a theater. And then with record players, and when everyone had record players, rather than going and seeing somebody play music, you just heard it in your own house. So I was kind of interested in that change, or what that meant to film as a medium or as an art medium. Art is in this weird thing where right now in the art world you are comfortable to go to a museum to see artworks and often expecting to leave your house to go see an artwork. But there's ways that you can also see an artwork now in your own home, or, well, especially if you buy work. But the rarefied experience of having to go somewhere to see something is changing, I think. proof that we're in Mexico City. Anyone from Mexico City knows.